The moment supply chains break down like we've seen, where does that leave us? It's a pretty scary situation. When you find yourself in an unplanned situation and everyone is rushing out to the grocery stores, everyone is buying up everything they can online, and you're sitting in your home with your family and you've taken care of them, the feeling is indescribable. So start by getting 30 days of food and water in your home. The more 30-day food sovereigns that we can create in this world, the less immediate pressure we put on our short-term, immediately delivered economy. A true food sovereign is not a selfish person. When you have a 90-day food supply, you can help two other families in a short-term situation.
Welcome to our Food Sovereignty Workshop. We have Michael Volt here, who's going to give us some deep knowledge on how this all works. Who is Michael? Now, when you registered for this event, you saw a little bit about his bio. I'll tell you a little bit more about him, and then we'll hear from him himself. But he is, first and foremost, a father, a husband, and he's an entrepreneur. He's got a background in sovereign technology, and in particular with crypto mining, doing some very cool stuff. And I know we don't spend a lot of time talking about that, but at some point, we do want to dive into sovereign money and how do we insulate ourselves from other financial systems that might cause fragilities in our lives. So he's got a lot of background there, founder of Sovereign 21, which is an organization, a company that's focused specifically on that technology. And he, as part of a new project, is the creator of the Positive Network. And the Positive Network is a community similar to ours, one that empowers education and learning in critical topics of self-sufficiency, which is why we're here, and critical thinking, which is, of course, what we do on the show and on our members-only community. And so today we're talking about food sovereignty. Now, the reason why Mike and I connected is I heard Mike give a talk at another event, another group that we're a part of, and it was very eye-opening for me. I was, sitting there in the audience and I was watching people raise their hands, and maybe we'll talk about that story. And, I was raising my hands and I was realizing, how unprepared I was. And so as soon as I heard Mike's talk, I immediately went out and started to supply myself up a little bit. Still not probably where I need to be exactly, but it's a work in progress. And so we're going to have the conversation with Mike. Mike, thank you so much for joining us today, my friend. How are you doing today?
I'm doing wonderful, Robert. Thanks for having me on. And yeah, excited to share with you and your community a couple insights and learn more about what can contribute to everybody today. So,
well, thanks for being here. And I know we were talking a little bit before we jumped on about how appropriate it is today to have this conversation. And I know you're not plugged into the news as much as we are, but for the rest of our audience, we were just talking earlier today about this. We don't know what it is. It might be a cyber attack. It might be a solar flare. It might be Volt Typhoon from China, this hacker group, but systems are going down. We have cell towers that are going down. And before we just hopped on here, apparently there was some, pharmacies that are going down. And so it is a situation where things are failing kind of around our world and our country. And so I wanted to start by getting, a little bit of an overview on your conception on, food sovereignty, really. When you say that word, what are you talking about? What does food sovereignty mean to you? And then, how did you get here essentially, before we dive into some of the specifics, but what was your journey like, to get to this point?
For sure. Yeah. And I mean, that's a long story. So I'll try to boil it down into a few bullet points. But I mean, when we talk about the news and your comment that I don't really follow stuff anymore, there's two reasons for that. Well, one is to protect my sovereign mind, I only allow certain things in. So if something gets to a crisis point where it's serious enough that maybe I should turn on the news and find out what's going on, I have a few people in my network, they'll be like, Mike, you should be paying attention to this. I'll have a peek. But really, like most of the time, I try to keep that stuff out of my psyche so I can focus on my mission. There are so many pieces of information coming at us these days. So when it comes to sovereign data and keeping a sovereign mind, I usually, the first person I hear something from is someone like you or somebody else in my network. So it's not surprising this stuff is going on because it's all coming at us and it's going to get worse in the next 5 years. So how did I get here? Well, it's a lifelong story. My family has been self-sufficient since I could remember in one way or another. Very hardworking people, build anything, grow anything, lived on a farm. I mean, I've, ridden horses, gone hunting, grown crops, all that sort of stuff. And I really took it for granted and moved away from that when I left the farm as a young man. But I got drawn back to it as I started to realize the nature of the world that we live in. And my eyes were really opened through a series of traumatic events late, a little bit later in life, where I was left with nothing. And I had to rebuild every aspect of my life, from divorce to bankruptcy to you name it. And I peeled back the curtain. I started to study, like, why are only a few people in this world successful and the rest of us are just following this plan that we've been taught? And this plan plan results in mediocrity at best, and it does not give us a sense of self-security and safety. And so I started studying. I started studying for years, and I realized that the way the world works is nothing like what we've been taught. And I know that you're revealing that to your followers and your listeners, which I just love. And, it was when it comes specifically to, the Positive Network, I co-founded that with my partner, Andrew, and it culminated about 2.5, 3 years ago, where we went to a conference, and the whole point of the conference was, it was a small, like 15-person intimate session. It was like, how are we going to change the world? And so the week before, in the flight down there, I just started writing and writing and writing. And we came up with the Sovereign Life operating system, and we recoined it SOVRN. So it's coinable. It's a little bit easier to spell.
Yeah.
And that came up with 12 points, ranging from sovereign time, sovereign food, which we'll talk about today, sovereign mind, sovereign body, sovereign money, sovereign children, sovereign relationships, sovereign data, sovereign defense. Those first 9 points culminate in creating a sovereign citizen, point number 10. At that point, when we have enough sovereign citizens, we can recreate sovereign governance and really fix this interesting world that we live in. And after that, we can create sovereign nations, where we were supposed to be at this point in time. So that's what's come to fruition. And our network is just getting started. We're growing every day and we're loving it. So food really hit for us about 5 years ago. My wife is a very intuitive person, and she just every day started getting on me like, we need food. We need to get food. We need to be prepared. And both of us grew up in homes where there was a lot of extra food stored away, and we had moved away from those core principles. And so I said, okay, well, let's get started in this. And we started slowly. And we realized once we had a supply of food in the house, there was a sense of emotional security that came over us that we didn't realize we were missing. Maslow's base hierarchy of needs, like food and water. And when I say food, I also mean water. That's important to note.
Right.
Having food and water is like, our grandparents would be rolling over in their graves if they saw how we live today. Everything is at the grocery store. Everything is coming from Amazon within a day. Well, the moment supply chains break down, like we've seen, where does that leave us? It's a pretty scary situation.
Right. And a lot of people, I think, just go to the grocery store, 3 times a week, just presuming it's always going to be there. Right. So, oh, what do we feel like tonight? We're going to go there and just, kind of get things on a whim. And if the systems break down, right, that option evaporates overnight and you're SOL, because now everybody's scrambling for food. And was this something that accelerated, during the pandemic or post-pandemic, or were you thinking about this before the pandemic? Because I know for many of us, I mean, myself included, I don't think I'd ever seen a grocery store that was empty. While walking through the grocery stores during the pandemic, there were, even the food, even the canned goods were all gone, right? The soups were gone, and all of the garbage food that nobody ever wants, even that was gone. And it was a very, very eerie feeling. And so I'm wondering, how that kind of impacted your journey.
Yeah, thank you. We started 2 years before the pandemic, and it was solely on my wife's intuition. I mean, we live out on a property. We have a commercial grade greenhouse. We have gardens. We have ducks and chickens and all that cute stuff. And, we started a couple years early, but when the pandemic hit, it really hit us. We were like, wow, okay, like we watched those grocery stores go empty. And for those listening, in a large city, there's 3 days worth of food in your entire city. There's 3 days. Everything is being trucked in. Unless there's a major warehouse, you might have a couple extra days. In a smaller town, there's 5 to 7 days worth of food in your entire community. We live moment to moment when it comes to our supply chains. And if there is any sort of panic, you're down to 24 hours. So when you become a true food sovereign, and I'm going to encourage a basic practice, some of you on the call may have gone beyond this, but a basic practice is building a 30-day food supply as a minimum, food and water. It's not hard to do. So when there is another situation that comes up, because there's natural disasters, there could be a number of things. There could be man-made incidents. No one saw the pandemic coming. I mean, I war gamed out all sorts of scenarios that could disrupt our businesses, and I did not see that one coming. So when you find yourself in an unplanned situation and everyone is rushing out to the grocery stores, everyone is buying up everything they can online, and you're sitting in your home with your family and you've taken care of them, the feeling is indescribable. So start by getting 30 days of food and water in your home.
Yeah, and that's something that I think is pretty accessible, hopefully for most people, right? I mean, it's not like a crazy thing that you have to do. And, we see a lot of these other stories, like Mark Zuckerberg is, building a bunker that has flaming moats around it and submarine escape hatches and all those things. Like, that's out of reach for me, for sure, right? I'm not going to be able to do that. So, the next best thing I can do is make sure I can at least, eat. And hopefully that's pretty accessible for most people.
Yeah, and really there's two ways of going about that. One is if you have a couple $1,000, if you're lucky to have a little disposable income, jump online and buy 30-day food supply for each member of your family from one of these freeze-dried companies that'll ship it right to your door. Like a swipe of your credit card or debit card, and it's solved. Get a water grade food container, go on, say, ChatGPT, one of the AIs, calculate the amount of water you'll need for each family member for 30 days, store that water. Make sure the food is in a cold and not cold, but a dry and dark place. It's sealed up properly, and you're done. So that's method number one. If you don't have a little bit of disposable income, then treat this as a practice when you're shopping for your regular goods. Buy an extra 5 or 10 pound bag of rice the next time you're at the grocery store. Buy an extra 5-pound bag of dry lentils. Get some canned goods. Add a little bit to each order and incrementally build up your supply. And I mean, that way you're constantly building that up and you're gaining that confidence. And then of course get your water as well over time, depending on what you can afford for a container. Make sure it's food grade or water grade.
Yeah, and that's such great advice. And that was one of the things that I started doing basically immediately. I wasn't really the person who went out and bought like a pallet of food, right away, but I did start thinking about buying an extra can of this. Like if I use one can of chili or something, I'll just buy 2 cans, and sort of replace it. Yeah, so it's just my stockpile slowly getting bigger and bigger. I'm like, oh, okay, now my cabinet is kind of full. Like I'm gonna have to pull some stuff out and move it to a different closet somewhere, right?
Yep.
And I will say that it does make you feel, a little bit better, because when you have bare shelves and you have, a cyber attack or some sort of infrastructure failure, then everybody freaks out and they need to run and stock up, and that's when you're not going to find the stuff. And we all just live through that.
Absolutely. The other thing too is when you have a 30-day food supply as a minimum, you're actually helping other people. Some people have this, thing against preppers, and you don't have to be a prepper to have a 30, 60 or 90-day food supply. You're taking pressure off of the economy in hard times. So if you're not one of the people running out and emptying the store shelves, some other family that didn't prepare has a little bit more access to food, right? Yeah. It doesn't put price pressure on gougers as much. So the more 30-day food sovereigns that we can create in this world, the less immediate pressure we put on our short-term, immediately delivered economy. The other thing is, when you do this, when you get to 30 days, give yourself a huge high five. And then if you've enjoyed it, go beyond it. A true food sovereign is not a selfish person. They're not a person who doesn't care about their neighbor, their mom and dad, their other family members. When you have a 90-day food supply, you can help 2 other families in a short-term situation. Yeah. And that is super important. Like, you're now providing for other people. When the pandemic hit and things got really tough for a lot of people, one of the most amazing things that my wife and I experienced was we were able to bring food to people's houses. We were able to bring baskets of food to our employees. And that gesture was more appreciated than anything we had ever done for our employees in incentive programs or helping them, anything. It was just, food is such a wonderful thing that we take for granted. I like people to think about this. Do you have car insurance? Do you have house insurance? For those business owners out there, do you have business interruption insurance? How many of you have insurance over the next 30 days worth of food going on your table? At that conference that you saw me speak at, and we're sitting in a room with very successful people, probably 80 or 90 in the room, 8% had more than 7 days worth of food. It wasn't a money problem. It was a mindset problem.
Yeah. And I watched that. I was in that room and I'm looking around, and you went through this kind of routine. How many people have, I don't know how you started at 6 months, like, or 0 hands, or, set like 3 days, all the hands, 7 days, bunch of hands drop down, 30 days, right? The whole, almost all the room drops down. And then, you go to 90 days or 6 months, it's basically, nobody in there. And that was a pretty eye-opening experience for me. I realized I was in, not the right group there. And it caused me to shift my thinking. And, I've become more prepared, and we're talking about it a lot more, and also trying to expand our preparedness beyond just food. But why do you think, you said it's mindset? And, even when I was telling some friends of mine about this event, I said, Mike's going to come speak. You should come and join us. People were looking at me kind of cross-eyed, like, food supply, why would I said, man, you should get 30 days. And he's still looking at me cross-eyed, like, why do I need 30 days for? Like, you're kind of a crazy person, And so you talk a lot about this. Are people afraid of the possibility? Does it make them face a fear that they're uncomfortable with? Or where do you think that's coming from?
I think it's probably a little bit of fear, and it's also cultural conditioning. I mean, I talked earlier about preppers. Like, I love preppers, the ones who, are pro-humanity. There's all sorts of different people in the world, but you don't have to be a prepper. And so this prepper idea has soured people's opinions of food security. I challenge anyone, if you still have grandparents around from the 30s, to ask them about food storage and preparation. And they literally would think we are insane for not having food resiliency because anything can happen, right? Like what trying to remember the author who said the anarchy of human society is only 9 missed meals away. What happens when your neighbor who has, a wife and kids who are starving, and if they don't have access to water, it's even worse. After 9 meals, your neighbor's coming over and saying, "Hey, do you got any food?" A day or two later, they're not asking anymore. I want to bring up another thing about safety when it comes to food, and it's kind of a joke about, kind of a play on the Fight Club saying, but the first rule about Food Club is you don't talk about Food Club. So remember that. Like you might start getting 30 days worth of food and get really proud of yourself and be just all excited and want to tell people. Don't tell people. Get your 30 days worth of food, shove it in the garage, shove it under the stairs, go beyond that. And when it's time to help, help. But this is a personal and private practice. Those of us who are out there trying to share this wisdom with people, we have to take some extra steps. We might not have all our food in our home. We also practice sovereign defense, probably don't knock on our doors. But for you guys, don't, keep it to yourselves. And when it's time to help, you help.
Yeah, and that's great advice. And I was thinking back to the pandemic. I mean, food was in short supply, but people were treating toilet paper like they were gold bars, and people were, bootlegging that stuff and going to the stores and raiding them at 5 in the morning and stuff like that. And that was just toilet paper. You can just, kind of solve that other ways. But if you can't eat, can't eat. And that just escalates things to a whole different level.
It really does. Yeah. And so there's some unique circumstances that would have to happen where things got really out of control. But I think you and I, and probably some of the listeners, share the opinion that in the next 5 years, maybe a little longer, things are going to get a lot more dicey before they get better. We're of the opinion that those who, bank the world, those who have been pulling strings for a long, long time, which is another topic for another day, they're not getting their way, it seems. And what it looks like is like things are going to turn around in the next 5 or 6 years into a beautiful, positive world. But it's like they're flailing, if that makes sense. They're trying everything they can to get to the outcome that they want. And so things will get a little bit more uncomfortable in the short term. But right behind that is there's a huge awakening of humanity right now. People are waking up going, something's wrong. I'm not quite sure what it is. Who can show me what I can do to protect my family? Because I'm uncomfortable.
I think that's brilliant. And I couldn't agree more. I think that an analogy that we've used a lot on our channel is this idea that, we're sort of being imprisoned, and our people imprisoning us, the jailers are, they're trying hard to keep control over the free people who they've locked up, and they're losing power, right? And so they're failing. And when they fail, we're ultimately going to be free, right? The gates will open and we'll be a lot more free because we won't be in their grasps anymore, but they keep squeezing and squeezing and squeezing. And as they do, right, I think the truth keeps slipping through their grasp. But, when I think about food, it's not just about starving to death. I think it's also about being reliant on the government, right? Being sovereign from having to go to a food supply or having to go get their CBDC currency so you can go buy the official food from the official store and that type of stuff. Is that also food sovereignty? I mean, how are you thinking about kind of that global term?
Food sovereignty, it is such a deep topic. Like there's so many things you can do to achieve food sovereignty. And so when I say, get a 30-day food and water supply, these are the basics. I mean, from there, you can learn to grow your own food. You can do this even in a city with vertical hydroponic stuff on your porch or in your kitchen. You can grow sprouts in your, in jars on your countertop. You can build a food community. So if you have a skill set that others need at all times, you band up with some people who are growing food or producing food, and you trade your skills with them. There's animal husbandry, there's hunting, there's foraging. You can become an expert forager, head out to the bushes with a bushcraft individual and learn from them, take courses in this stuff. Food preparation, it's just so deep. I mean, buy yourself a freeze dryer or partner with a couple families to buy a freeze dryer. It's a bit of an investment. Make a gigantic pot of chili and you freeze dry it. It lasts 25 years. Wow. You just have to add water back to it. So people say like, I can't do this. I live in this, or this is my circumstances, or just be creative. The human mind, the sovereign mind, the critical thinking, self-sufficient, independent mind can accomplish anything. You just need to get into the communities and learn information. There's new information and there's ancient information. Just get yourself exposed to it.
Yeah, and we're very conditioned. I know me, I'm a city boy. I live downtown Phoenix. I was born and raised in Phoenix. And so, a lot of that stuff is foreign to me, farming and growing stuff and keeping even my house plants alive and all that, right? But the point is we got to break that conditioning. The idea that food is just going to be there all the time, I think is a new no modern invention, and not a good one necessarily. When I read back, history and stuff, people were a lot more prepared, back in the 1800s. They were canning stuff and they had food stored, for all sorts of stuff all over the place. And we've gotten very, I think, accustomed, speaking for myself personally, just very complacent almost until recently. And the pandemic really, I think, shifted a lot of thinking. And so some of that stuff is pretty advanced, right? Hydroponics and all that stuff. And you're talking about a 30-day food supply. You had some really good tips on that, right? About some, what kind of containers to get, how to seal this stuff up. Can you dig into that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. If you're gonna build it up yourself with the dry goods, again, kind of poke fun at Amazon here. In one day, you can get these supplies to your house from Amazon, but get them while you can. Get food grade buckets that don't let light through, so thick plastic buckets, typically 5 gallon or smaller depending on what you're storing. And then get a Mylar bag that matches the size of those buckets. Get yourself, if it's a 5 gallon bucket, a pair of oxygen absorbers per bucket, and you're going to fill your dry goods into those buckets all the way up to the top. Drop your oxygen absorbers in there, seal those Mylar bags, and then put that lid on that bucket. And it's always important to write the date that you put the stuff in there. So a Sharpie or however you want to do it, write down the date that you put it in, what goods are inside there, and then write that down on a sheet of paper. If you want to get a little more advanced with it, you can run a spreadsheet. As my wife says, spreadsheets are my second love language. I have a little bit of an addiction to them. But if you're not good at spreadsheets, ChatGPT will build these for you by just speaking to it. So I would, again, while you have access to the internet, leverage tools like AI, like a free version of ChatGPT, to say, there's 4 people in my home, 2 kids, 2 adults. What's our daily caloric needs each? Educate yourself. You go, okay, now write that down or print it out. Then say, okay, I have 20 pounds of dried kidney beans. I have 40 pounds of rice. I have 50 pounds of quinoa. What is the macro or macronutrient caloric, content of these foods, and how long will it last my family of 4? So use these tools so you don't have to figure it out yourself. It's kind of a shortcut and go, oh, I thought I had 30 days worth of food. I have 13 or 14 days. I need to keep building up. And so you can keep
Yeah.
tracking this, but always make sure when you build these spreadsheets or you have a list, print it off and put it near your food supply, right? Have that redundancy of being non-computer dependent in the background.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And that was a question I had for you, because it's kind of a lot of math, right? And I'm pretty terrible at math. So how do you start dividing by, the household, and how much food do you need per day? And so ChatGPT will
Oh,
help with big time with that. They'll just basically
yeah.
tell you
I
the plan.
built a food longevity calculator in Excel years ago. And I put so many hours into it. And then when ChatGPT dropped, I talked to it for like 5 minutes. I'm like, well, there goes that tool. Great. But I mean, it just accelerates everybody. It makes it a level playing field for all of us.
Yes. And do you also have, some recommendations on those, like on those buckets, like you mentioned, kidney beans and rice and quinoa? And, once you get that stored in there, are you, you're leaving it there for 20 years or, 10 years? And they're like the desiccation packets. Is that what they're called? Like the little,
The oxygen absorbers, yeah. So you want
yeah.
to pull the additional oxygen out of the top of that Mylar bag just so that, we don't have excessive spoilage. There's conflicting beliefs on how long this stuff lasts. So if you go to any official government websites or any agencies funded by the food industry, they say 2 or 3 years for most of these goods. But I've seen people testify that they've had it in these buckets for 5 or 10 years and it's been fine. If it goes in dry and without bugs or pests already in the product when you pour it in, make sure you're watching, they can last a lot longer. But one function that works really well to avoid, a situation coming up and you open up a, spoiled box or bag or a bucket of food, is make rotating the supply through your kitchen an active part of your food preparation. So we pull from our rice buckets to fill our buckets, our secondary buckets in our kitchen, and then we buy new rice and it goes into storage as 2024's storage rice. So actively turn your food storage over, but don't deplete it, right?
Got
Keep
it.
that thing going. If you have stuff like say you have a certain type of bean or split pea and you're like, I can't stand eating this, just know that, don't turn it over. Know that it will expire at some point and you might want to think about replacing it or building up a little larger of a supply. So just be cool with that, because not everything in there is going to be tasty, but when there's no food anywhere, you're not really worried about taste. You're worried about macronutrients.
Right. And I was thinking about that in terms of preparing the food, right? Like, so I might be able to buy a bunch of kidney beans and quinoa and rice, but I would throw that in my rice cooker with the electricity on, and probably after reading a recipe on whatever, right? So it's like, you're not going to have all those same tools around. And so, for me, I think I would want to probably also maybe include some literature on how to like remind myself how to cook some kidney beans or whatever. How long should I boil it or what should I, I don't know what to do with it. So like I could have this bucket of kidney beans, but not really know what to do with it. So,
Yeah, they're going to be a
no.
little hard to chew on if you can't cook them. Yeah, so that's where this whole process, it either confuses you or you get into it and it becomes fun. So when you move this stuff through your kitchen, and maybe they're not your favorite meals, but once a month or once every 2 weeks, you're like, okay, I'm making a food supply meal. And you cook this stuff. And yeah, you can use a pressure cooker to do your beans. You can boil them on the stove. But then you start thinking like, what would I do if I didn't have power? And
Yeah.
that's where preparation starts to expand and get into the larger categories. And people are like, well, maybe I should get a generator. Okay, well, what type of generator? If you get a gasoline generator, gasoline spoils. So then you're turning your gas. So, okay, well, it better be a propane generator. Propane lasts 15, 20 years. Okay, great. But then you can only cook that. How much propane do I have? How long does that last running a generator? Do I have a freezer? Now you need a freezer freezing schedule, 2 hours or 1.5 hours of the freezer being on every 6 to 8 hours. So you're not running your generator full. Like it just explodes in complexity. So boil it down to this simplicity. Wherever you're at, if you have a couple years worth of food, you're probably already working on the next steps. If you have nothing, forget everything I said, put it in the back of your mind and start with the basics and just start from where you're at and be completely comfortable that, hey, at least I'm starting. And it just becomes a way of life over time. And you don't have to obsess over it. You don't have to think, oh, I'm not doing good enough. You just every day, and this goes with everything you're doing in your life, whether it's your job, your business, your personal life, your relationships, every day you're in competition with yourself and yourself only. Get 1% better every day.
Yeah.
Forget about what everyone else has got accomplished.
Yeah, and I know my natural tendency is to kind of go big when I start thinking, like I get in the zone, I get all hyped up about it, and I kind of pump the brakes on that a little bit, and I do want to be a little more intentional about this, right? And sort of not buy a bunch of stuff that I'm not going to use or sell, or just kind of go out and buy a bunch of
Yep.
freezers and stuff like that. So I am slowly building it up, but I will tell you that by getting even just the basics, some of the foundational stuff done, it does bring that sense of relief. I'm not like, okay, I better go just double check and refill my supplies there. So just doing the basics alone will give you some of that calm.
Yep, yep, absolutely. And even if your spouse or your family members, giving you funny looks, just have that prompt that insurance talk. Like we have car insurance,
Right.
like we don't have food insurance, and
Yeah.
it kind of clicks people, and they go, "Oh, you're not doing prepper talk." That actually makes a lot of sense.
Right. And I think it's just so programmed in that there's always been food there. So there will always be food there. That the idea that it's not going to be there, even though we saw it was not there, just 3 years ago, it still short circuits people's brains. And
It's
we
a
don't,
bizarre cognitive dissonance. We were shown how fragile the world is, and yet we still pick up our spear and our net and we go to the grocery store to, catch some crackers and some apples. It doesn't make a lot of sense.
well, that's why we're grateful that you're here explaining this. So, what about water, too? Because you also talked about that, right? Water is something else that I think a lot of people might overlook because it's the same concept, maybe even worse. You just turn the faucet on and it's going to come out. And, we've also seen some other things like chemical disasters, right? Like in Ohio, in East Palestine, the water supply might be problematic where they say it's fine, but, you have questions about that. And so, what are your thoughts on securing just, some water, and how do you do that?
Yeah. So again, I would start with calculating, how much your family members need for the period of time that you want to be protected for. Set that goal. And the best thing to do is to buy a water container or containers that, again, what you don't want is you don't want your water to get warm and you don't want light to be able to get through the container because all water carries maybe a small amount of bacteria in it or things that can grow. So you don't want that to be activated. So a cool, dark place with a proper sealed container, a water grade container. You can find these online anywhere, lots of places to find them, and just start building that up. If you want a cleaner water source, you can buy some filtration systems to fill this water storage up. Water is the immediate concern. A person can be in a mode of starvation for a lot longer than they think. I mean, I often will once a year, I'll try to get all the way to a 7-day fast, and it's surprising fasting after 3 days, your body has so much energy and so activated and is using stores within it. You can go quite a bit past that in an emergency situation. But water can get you pretty quick. So dehydration is very, very serious. So you want to make sure that one is covered off for sure.
Yeah, and so same process. You basically go in, and got four people, tell Chat GPT maybe where you're located. Like, I'm in a desert, right? I'm in Arizona. We don't get rain, we don't really have a lot of water around, and it's dry and humid. So, our water consumption might be higher than someone else who maybe lives in a more humid environment. So we might need 2 gallons a day. Well, they might need 1 gallon a day. You don't know. So, calculate it and then figure out how to store it. Now you're also probably cycling that out. And I think there's also some like purification tablets and stuff that you might put in there. So you got to kind of get the details on that.
Yeah, so there's purification tablets. There are straining systems. So those life straws, like if you're out and about, you're mobile, maybe you have a go bag, if that's something you're into. There's a lot of ways to get into it. And you raised a good point. If you live in AZ or Florida and the power goes out, your water consumption in the summertime environment is going to be far in excess of what mine is. I still got a foot and a half of snow on the ground up here in
Yeah.
Canada, right? So you're going to be in a very different environment. My problem is I don't want to freeze to death, so I have a unique set of problems. So every situation that you're in is unique. So there's not one universal advice. This is where you bring your sovereign mind into the picture and go, what would happen? And don't do it in a fear mindset. Do it in, how would I be prepared? And when you run into, I don't know, then pick up a book, go on the internet. The thing I love about books and developing critical thinking about this and other things is someone spent their entire life perfecting one skill, 40, 50 years. Then they put it in a flippin' book and they published it for you. Said, hey, here's how you can know everything I know. The only thing you have to layer over that is what is the intention of the author? What are they trying to convince me of? So, you grab the gems out of it, but everything you want to know is already out there.
Yeah. And that's why I'm so grateful to have you, right? Because you have really sunk a lot of time into this and thought out all the permutations about how this could go wrong and, what some of the likely scenarios are. So if we just confirm that we have, everybody, no matter where you're at, right, should probably have 30 days of food, should absolutely have 30 days of food, 30 days of water. That's part of your insurance plan. And that should get you through most events, right? So if you're gaming this out, that's going to include things like, a hurricane, maybe foreign attack, right? A chemical spill, kind of all these things. If you need to hunker down, and not leave and the supply chains fail, should be good. Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
Yeah, absolutely. It was interesting up here in northern BC where we live. Right after the pandemic, we had a massive amount of flooding from a large snow shed, and we had 20 bridges and roads destroyed between us and our supply chain in Vancouver. There was actually one community, Hope, that had no way to get into the community. Every road in and out of the community, all around it, was destroyed. They had to have supplies helicoptered in as relief.
Wow.
And so we watched the shelves empty a second time. And again, 24 hours. The first 8 hours, the shelves started emptying. And then remember, people start taking pictures of the shelves and posting on social media. And then everyone they lose their minds. They actually go in and buy more than they need. And so if you're sitting at home and you're ready, you're not contributing to that panic.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And you can be the kind of the rock in your family. You're the provider. Everybody else may be freaking out, and you can even say, we're good, right? I already thought about you and I already have some of this prepared. So, and maybe you're not going to need the full 30 days. Maybe it's a 7-day, emergency, but you got the 30 days. So you got some stuff you can share and you're not caught in that position. So, okay, great stuff. So everybody really should be thinking about that. And it's pretty accessible, right? You can go to Costco. They've got the big huge bags of whatever. You can go there, go to Amazon. A lot of the stuff that you mentioned, the food bins, the insert sheets, the oxygen packets, it's all on Amazon. You can, load up there. And of course, don't talk about it, right? Once you get this all situated.
Yeah, just keep it to yourself, right? And each situation that comes up, if you have a 30-day food supply, like you said, and there's a 7-day crisis, well, share with 2 other families. And if you know that the power is coming back online at a substation in 4 days, then share, right? Make that determination.
Yeah, good stuff. Okay. And so once they have this all situated, I have my leaf blower guy right outside right now, of course. But once you have that situated, what's kind of the next step? What are people looking towards maybe to level that up? I know you mentioned like a food community where you're sharing stuff. And there was another content creator that I was listening to who shared this story to me. I think he lives in a rural area in Minnesota. He was explaining, around Thanksgiving, he just goes and gets his turkey from his neighbor, and he goes and he gets this from this neighbor and this from that neighbor. And I was like, right? Such a foreign thing for me, right? I just go out and I just kind of pick stuff up from the grocery store. So, what's kind of the next iteration, or once you've got your 30-day food supply, what other advice do you have for people who want to continue on this journey?
So before you get too technical, I mean, we're talking just macronutrients. So if you go beyond 30 days, then it's probably time to put a couple more things in your food supply that are going to give you, vitamins and minerals and that sort of stuff. And so there's a range of things you can do. You can build up a vitamin supply, which, I mean, vitamins are arguably not the best depending on the sources of them, but then you can start building up things like my wife got us to get a whole bunch of powdered dry milk, which has a bunch of vitamins in it. I can't remember them off the top of my head. You can have a large storage of organic broccoli sprouting seeds. And with just a little bit of water, I think I did a YouTube video on this a little while ago, just a little bit of water and some glass jars, you can make something that doesn't have high macronutrients, but it has a ton of vitamin C, D, iron, a bunch of other stuff. So you can start to pack those things in there. The other thing too that I like to joke about is I'd be pretty cranky 30 days without coffee. So once your
Yeah.
base needs are met, like start getting some of your, let's call them luxury goods, right? Like you don't want to be fed but angry because you're going through coffee withdrawals. So you really personalize this the way that you want it after your safety has been met. And then yeah, after that, I mean, you're just, if you take this as a lifelong journey, you'll either go 30 days and be like, okay, I'm good in most situations. If there's a situation that there's no food for more than 30 days, we've got a bigger problem on our hands. Like we're talking some different situations. But if you take this on as a passion and a hobby, you can raise animals, you can trade in a community. Those are the fun ones. So we grew 400 or 500 pounds of pickling cucumbers 2 years ago. We were able to can the most amazing pickles, 2 years worth of supply, but we still traded 300 plus pounds of pickles for different things around our community, right? So there's so many things you can do that I think maybe there's a couple questions from your audience of things they're interested in that they might want to know a little bit more about.
Yeah, there are some great questions in here. And Sweet Potato was asking about the water supply, right? And here's a good question. I think, how much water is that for one person for 30 days? So if it's like a gallon a day or 2 gallons a day, then it's probably, 30 gallons. So you'd have, right, like 6 of those 5-gallon containers, which is a lot, right? That's a lot of water. So you'd have to get those gallons and then store them somewhere. And I think that's about right. A gallon, maybe 2 gallons. Do you have any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, what is it? It depends on the individual, but it's about three. You guys deal in gallons. I think we're in liters up here. We pick and choose our metric system based on some rules of insanity up in Canada. But about 3 liters per day per person. That is like a healthy amount. So you can also look at like what is a survival amount, and you can really, it becomes an individual math problem per person and per family. And that's why like I encourage the use of tools like ChatGPT, or do some Google searches and manually do the math yourself. But it does end up being a large volume of water in even a 4-person family. So that's something to take into consideration. Where are you going to store that? Are you going to do 1 week to start each container that you can afford on whatever budget you put aside, that you're building up a week at a time, once a month? You really have to customize to your situation.
Do you have any thoughts on canning? There's some other questions about food canning.
Yeah, I love canning. I mean, we do, because we grow a lot of food, we also will cook very, very large meals. So we'll cook up stews, we'll cook up chilies, we'll cook up pasta sauces, and then we'll pressure can them, or we'll boil can them, and then we will put them in our pantry downstairs, and they last for 2-3 years plus. So we do a lot of that stuff. And my wife started teaching me how to do it about 2 years ago, and actually took a lot of joy in it. Every time I go in to the pantry, and we had some pickles that end up being about this big. And so they literally, one slice of pickle in one of these huge jars fits on an entire sandwich. I just have a smile on my face every time I pull one of these things out.
Yeah, that sounds great. So canned goods, I think, is something that might be a little, advanced for some of us, right? But that is maybe the next step. So you're bucketing your stuff, you're watering your stuff, and then you decide, how to use that stuff, and then can it for the future. So that was another great question. And someone was asking about, the expiration. How long can you eat canned food past the expiration date? And this person said that, Sweet says, I ate some Chef Boyardee past the expired date and was very successful there.
Open it up, smell it, and
So I think you just probably keep tabs on it and
yeah, make
decide,
your own decision. It lasts typically way
you're
longer
doing
than
the
the
same thing, in other
expiration
words,
date.
like you're marking it when it was made, consuming it before it goes bad, and just recycling your food when you're canning it or sharing it with friends.
I saw also in there flour and sugar, and those are great things to stock up on as well. We make all our own bread. We have some sourdough, a pair of sourdough starts that are about 100 years old. We didn't start them 100 years ago. We got them given to us. And the difference between a homemade sourdough bread and bread that can sit on a shelf in a store for 1 or 2 weeks without going bad, just look at the ingredients lists on the food that you're buying. That's another thing that I think would offer value to everybody is when you get a food supply going, the next natural step is clean your food sources up. Like we have an intentional poisoning going on, especially in North America, to preserve food as long as anything that can sit on a shelf for a long period of time without being frozen, it typically has something in it that your body is going to react to negatively over a long period of time with long exposure. The less ingredients, the better. The more natural ingredients, the better. So for making your own bread, which is surprisingly simple, that can be a fun thing someone can get into. I used to eat bread and I would feel miserable. Like I would have these periods of getting tired and being lethargic. I have been living in bliss for the past couple of years, eating as much sourdough bread as I want, with respect to, my health goals. But that's something, if you have flour and water and maybe you have access to eggs, you have a large amount of healthy bread with a little bit of sourdough starter. Or you can just make traditional bread as well.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I'm sure it tastes better. You feel better, tastes better. I'm sure it's, amazing to have that homemade fresh bread coming out, to incorporate that into your routine sounds like a nice benefit of getting your food situation
Yeah,
situated.
and remember too, like the amount of stuff you can do is dictated by your personal situation in your life. So my wife and I have worked hard to be able to have her retired and taking care of our babies. They're 5, 3, and 18 months old.
Awesome.
And so we were able to transition to full-time care for them ourselves, move away from the, having both parents out of the home, which I believe is a system designed to break up the family. So we're very fortunate because a lot of this stuff takes a lot of time. And so you'll be able to implement what you can based on the time you have. And so stack what you can as you can and just be thankful for what time that you do have because time is precious. That's why sovereign time is one of the first principles that we teach in Sovereign Life Operating System. When you can free up time, you do a time audit, both digital and your life, and if you free up 1 hour a day, you've just gained 2 years of your life back in the next 50 years. Like it's incredible. So access to time is a superpower that will allow you to do a lot of things that you have on your wish list or to-do list.
Right. And all these things compound off one another. So you free up some more time, then you can focus on some cleaner food. You have some cleaner food and some safety and security in your food. You have more energy, then you have more clear thinking, then you can be more productive in your, money generating endeavors to get more money to secure. It's all just compounds and it's like a flywheel.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
can you tell us a little bit more about Sovereign OS and kind of the work that you're doing? What's your vision for this and where are you at and what can people do to join and kind of be a part of it?
Oh, I appreciate that, man. Yeah, so we're pretty early on. My partner Andrew and I founded the network. Andrew is a governance expert, founder of Mother DAO Labs. He's got a tech stack that will solve decentralized autonomous organizations in the blockchain space. It also has applications in governing artificial intelligence. So this big bad wolf that's coming for us actually will listen to us, which will be very critical. And when we get enough sovereign citizens in the world, it can actually transform human governance. So I love Andrew. He is a brilliant individual, super high IQ, and he can still talk to us like a normal human being, which is very unique for that bright of an individual. So our mission together is to raise people up, to give them hope, to show them age-old and new principles that can give them back control over their lives and have them spread this message to more people. So we're very new, many, many years in the living and making, and our community just launched. If you want to, you can go to positivenetwork.info. You can join our wait list for when we launch our community. And the thing I'm really excited about that we talk about, Robert, is behind the Positive Network, which is for everyone to gain life skills, is the posse. And it's the first four letters of the Positive Network, POSI, and that's the Protectorate of Sovereign Individuals. So this is a group behind the Positive Network of change makers like yourself and hundreds of more people around the world who are we're out there fighting for people. We're informing them. We have technologies, we have companies, we have followings, and we're putting ourselves out there to make a change. There's this World Economic Forum out there who are cooperating with each other, not to our benefit or our future. And there are so many hundreds and thousands of change makers in the world that are working on an island and we don't know of each other. So we're circling up the posse and we're going to make change over the next 10 years. That's our big mission. I have other businesses, I have other pursuits, but this is my mission for the rest of my life.
It's a great mission and it's very inspirational, and I think something that's sorely needed because we spend a lot of time on our channel and in our community talking about like the front stage stuff, right? That's what's happening in the world. The
Yeah.
indictments are happening, and DOJ and the FBI, they're all doing this, right? We cover the World Economic Forum. We watch how all the different institutions are using their power to gain control over our freedoms, right? They do not want us to be sovereign. They'd rather have that control themselves. And we often don't see what's happening backstage, right? We don't see that there are people like you who are very intelligent, working with very smart people behind the scenes, connecting the dots, creating these networks because they believe in freedom, right? It's part of the human condition. And it is very inspirational. And I'm really excited that you're building this and sharing it with all of us. And so for people who want to learn a little bit more, you can go on, you're also on YouTube. You just launched your YouTube channel and
Yep.
you've got some great interviews with your colleague. I've listened to several of them already. And so if you just go onto YouTube and search the Positive Network, they can also find you there and subscribe to you, and you've got a waiting list and you've got this OS. So can you give us a kind of a framework, and what is this OS? People are going to incorporate skills from these different categories into their lives and hopefully become more sovereign.
Yeah, so as we roll it out, imagine, like you said, is a perfect example, and we have a graphic that was built just recently. Imagine a flywheel of these 12 categories, time, food, mind, body, money, children, relationships, data, defense, citizen, governance, and nation. So imagine a wheel where the first 9 points are around the outside, and then citizen, governance, and nation are in the middle. And where Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a triangle with food, air, water, and then, the higher needs built up on this pyramid. In reality, for you to self-actualize and improve your life and change the world, and I want to talk about in everyday average individuals changing the world as well. Remind me to talk about that. On this flywheel, there is no point to start on Maslow's hierarchy that makes sense for everybody. Some people will prioritize, a relationship with their children over building a 30-day food supply. Some people will. So on our flywheel, you start where it makes sense for your unique situation, your skill sets, your assets. Everything about you is unique. So you start where you can. If you're going to start at the first one of freeing up time, your second priority might be to spend more time with your children, or to make more money, or to learn how to defend yourself, or to work on your sovereign body. And so what you should do when you're thinking about improving yourself is go for the low-hanging fruit where you have the highest skill sets or resources to immediately make a change in your life, where that frees up something that allows you to work on the next change. And so imagine that flywheel where you're binging around from point to point to point and improving yourself incrementally 1% a day in competition with yourself. And then how we change the world, how we turn this, for lack of a better word, shit show around. Each one of us has a skill and a gift. Small or big is just perception. And so if we have tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands, and then millions out of the 8 billion people in the world, you only need a couple million people who stand up and contribute to humanity every day in their unique zone of genius. And your brother or sister to each of your shoulders is doing the same. We raise everybody up. Because those of us who can get strong have to help the weaker people in this world. It's our basic humanity. And so each one of us doing what we're amazing at, we will change everything over the coming decades.
I think you're absolutely right about that. And what I think is so important about that philosophy is that it's very decentralized in many ways, right? We're oftentimes looking at the federal government. We're going, man, this is a David versus Goliath situation. They have all the power, they've got all the rule, they got all the money, they got all the enforcement. Or you say, Facebook's in control, right? They are brainwashing our population along with Google and the rest of the big tech. And how do you possibly compete with that? And it is hard, right? It's not an easy walk in the park. They have a lot of power. This is something that is going to take some time, and it's going to take a lot of, energy on our side. But it doesn't have to be this big. We don't have to build a separate Goliath. In other words, like we don't have to
No.
be this giant, this giant beast that goes and competes with Facebook directly. It is, and you've shared about this, but the vision is kind of you're bundling these other groups together, right? So watching the Watchers, our community is focused on sovereignty and freedom and individuality, and we study this stuff every day, and we talk a lot about the problems, but we also want to be a part of the solution. And so we're leveling up our skill sets. We just did a fitness challenge and some other things because we want to be more sovereign and free in all of those various domains. But obviously we can't do it alone. And, we just have our limited skill set. So the idea is we bundle, kind of with you, right? You're working and you're building your community, and we can cross pollinate and we can continue to support each other in our journey.
Yes. Yeah.
That's how I'm seeing it.
It's hundreds and thousands of communities like yours and mine getting together, knowing of each other and working together towards we need to be looking in the same direction and rowing in the same direction. And that will change everything. In the first podcast episode, Andrew does a great job of describing how we do this. We need to decentralize power. We need to break up power into thousands of small pieces so that power can't cooperate and overtake laws, which is what's happening right now. Power has centralized right now, which allows power to destroy and crush law. So we need to break up control into many, many, many pieces so that there's still corruption that's in human nature, but that corruption is in small pockets that can't cooperate with other corrupt entities or individuals. The World Economic Forum is just a cooperation of corruption. It's too big.
Right. And they all pat each other's back. They all have the same interest. They may not go in there and sign a conspiracy contract with each other, but they all know that if they have control of, the money supply, and they have control of people's way of thinking through different, DEI policies or whatever, right? They can all implement these things. They all get richer as they accumulate sovereignty that belongs to us. They just take it away from us and incorporate it into their power.
They probably hate each other's guts, but they know through a mutual pact they can keep doing what they're doing.
Great stuff. Okay, and I want to ask about, as we wrap up, I know we have we're a little over time, but I'm grateful for you being here and your time. I wanted to see if you had any thoughts on, maybe what is coming next. And I know it's kind of a big, broad, general question. I'm not asking you to look at a crystal ball or anything, but do you have an idea in your mind about, looking back at historically at the patterns of how society has gotten here? Where do you think we're going? Any general thoughts on that category?
Two thoughts, and these are just my opinions. These are just ideas. One, the fall of Rome took about 150 years. Nobody in the middle of Rome falling apart in 150 years had any idea what was going on or the gravity of the situation. But by the end of that, very few people could read, write. Building roads was lost. Building tools and technologies were lost. A lot had been degraded, but it took time. I believe that we are in the middle of a decline in modern day society in North America. But it is slow, right? It is very slow, and it creeps along very slowly. And that gives us an opportunity to shift that and change that direction. So that's an opinion of mine. Those who control power and wealth have given up on North America, and they're shifting their focus elsewhere. We need to take back that. We need to take back that attention and stop this slow degradation. The other thing that I think is happening, which I kind of hinted at, is there's going to be some more desperate actions in the coming years leading up to probably before 2028 and 2030, where we see some fantastical headlines of crises, different things, either natural or man-made. And these are going to be mental, emotional, and physical challenges that we're going to have to make it through as a society. So I believe there's a little bit more rough times ahead, and that's why I'm urging everyone to have a little preparation. But remember that on the other side of these hard times, there is so much good coming. There are so many people waking up at the same time that it's terrifying the centers of power. So to try to put us back to sleep, they're going to have to put in more fear, more shame, the tools of manipulating the human psychology that has to be put into society for them to try to keep things on the rails. So those are opinions, but we're seeing it.
Yeah,
one of my things is I don't watch the news so that I can keep my mindset straight, and I get the crisis highlights from a few people. That's just my way of not I try not to get, in the wrong mindset because this work can be very challenging. And the work that you do is amazing because you're in it, you're facing it, and you're informing people every day about what's actually going on. But once you can get people to accept that this world is not built anymore for us, then people go, like with the lodge, which I'm so excited to join. And thank you for inviting me. People go, okay, now what? What do I do? And that's the transformation, the urgency. And then now what do we do?
Yeah, and I think that's why your work is so important, because there are answers to these things, but I think they try to obfuscate them. They'd rather you just continue to order from DoorDash and pay your taxes and watch whatever the news tells you. And there's friction in the alternative path, right? It's actually harder to go find these things. And we had some questions about, homeschooling and stuff, right? I think there's a trend that people are tired of that old way. I think people are realizing that it's not in their interest. Our government, going to war, inflating our currencies and forcing us to, do certain things to our bodies, or else this, that, and the other thing. As you said, they're not serving us anymore, right? Our government, I think, is being either commandeered by foreign powers, or they're managing a decline. And my take on it is that we don't have to be a part of that. It's a big country. There's a lot of very intelligent people out there who can create their own, parallel economies, their own communities, their own
Absolutely.
food exchanges. When the rest of the ship is sinking, right, we're building our lifeboats now, and we're ready to, to sail to, greener shores. And so very grateful to have you, Mike. And I don't want to take any more of your time, but any other, final words, any other thoughts?
No, just again, I want to express my appreciation for what you've done and what you're building, and informing people of the corruption that is prevalent in society. Because when good people turn off their minds and say this is just too hard, or it's too much to think about, it's too stressful, that's exactly the intent of the people who run the world. That's the outcome they want, is for the good people and the strong people to say, I can't, I won't. And we have to wake the lions up. It's time.
Michael Voltz, man, very, very insightful stuff. Thank you so much for joining us. And I want to reference again where people can find you. So the Positive Network is the name of your organization, and you're putting out some great content. So they can search for that on YouTube. That's where they can find you. You're also it's thepositivenetwork.info.
Yep. No, just positivenetwork.info. Yeah. We've got a book that's halfway written that we hope to have out this year. Join our wait list if you want to hear more about us. I'll be joining the lodge, so I'm excited about that. And yeah, just appreciate all of you. And thank you to all the listeners for opening your minds and making changes for yourself and your family, and eventually your community and humanity as a whole.
Michael Voltz, we would absolutely love to talk to you. I know many people here would love to talk to you again, because I know you're just a wealth of knowledge. So thanks again for joining us. And my friends, make sure that you get over there and you subscribe to his channel and follow his great work. You can also go to the website, sign up for his wait list, for his newsletter. I certainly have. And we're going to keep talking about this stuff here. And we're grateful that you joined us. And so we'll leave it there. And Michael, I'll send you a text afterwards and just say thank you if we can follow up. But my friends, I want to thank you for joining us on this lodge event. We're going to have many more of these types of things. And so we'd love to hear what you thought about it, what your feedback was, what else you'd like to hear. And hopefully, at the very, very minimum, you're getting your 30-day food supply and your water supply situated, because that's going to make us a lot more fortified, a lot more sovereign. We're not going to be reliant on showing up at the empty and then turning to our government to beg for a handout. We'll be prepared. We'll be more sovereign for ourselves and for our families and our communities. And so, Michael Voltz, one more time, thank you so much for being here, my friend. Have a great week, everybody. We'll see you back here soon.
Thank you, brother.
Bye, guys.